My name is James Tidy, and I'm going to be discussing ethnicity in the classroom. The data presented in this PowerPoint was collected from Miss Smith's 4th grade social studies class. I wanted to start this PowerPoint off with a quote by Audre Lorde. "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." Some background information about the school. It is a Title I public elementary school. It's also a low-income elementary school. It's located in a very urban area. It's surrounded by lots of different neighborhoods. Students are from very diverse cultures and ethnicities, and some of the major ethnicities consist of Hispanics, Caucasians, Arabic, and Swahili. The school also offers an EL program, so if there's any students that don't know English as a first language, then it really helps them learn stuff like that, which I thought was pretty cool. Some information about the class. Miss Smith has been teaching various elementary levels for 13 years. The social studies class has about 20 to 25 students, and it's only about 30 minutes long. Miss Smith's class is very diverse, with majority of the class being either Hispanic or Caucasian. She does have a few other students that are of a different ethnicity, but most of her students are either Hispanic or Caucasian. There are about 40 to 50 students in 4th grade as a whole, all of which are split up in between two teachers. Students sit at large round tables in groups of 4, and these groups also play a role in the wagon trail lesson Miss Smith has been teaching. I'll get more into detail with the wagon trail lesson, but for right now we're just discussing the main points. Ethnicity in the classroom. These are some of the quotes that I took out of the book, and then on my next slide I'll make sure to align them with how Mrs. Smith's class reflects these points. Emphasis on active mastery rather than passive acceptance. Individuals are responsible for what happens to them. Valuation of fairness. People are given equal opportunities in social, political, and economic institutions rather than hierarchical privileges. Belief in rationalism rather than traditionalism. Things are not accepted just because they have been done before. There has to be a logical reason for doing something. Emphasis on peer relationships rather than superordinate/subordinate. The microculture advocates equality or horizontal relationships rather than hierarchy or vertical relationships. Ms. Smith really puts a lot of emphasis on the peer relationships, going back to how she does group her students in pairs of 4 at one round table. She really wants her students to get to know each other and be able to work well with each other, so I thought that was a really awesome thing. How ethnicity is portrayed in the classroom. The students are responsible for how much work they put into a given lesson or assignment. When it comes to the lesson about the wagon trail, the success of the groups was dependent on the role each student was playing and if they were playing that role to the fullest. So in this given lesson, Mrs. Smith was teaching about the wagon trail, and each table was their own wagon trail group. And each student had to play a main role, and a lot of the students had to, if they weren't participating like they should have been, then they would be either kicked out or they would be kind of like lose their status if they were like of a higher status on that wagon. So a lot of working together, and students really had to put their part in order to succeed in the lesson. When it comes to group decisions, the groups had to take into consideration what they wanted their next move as a group to be. Everyone had an equal say in if they should or shouldn't do the task given to them by the teacher, or in the lesson's case, the narrator. So Ms. Smith would come in and give the students a question or something to answer, and the students would have to answer that. But it wasn't just a answer and go along. The lesson was based on points, so the students really had to put their minds together and decide, do we want to do this, do we not want to do this? And a lot of the certain roles that the students played were voted by the students, which I thought was another awesome thing that was happening because it really pushed that teamwork in the students and in the classroom. When deciding this decision, the group had to use logical thinking to make their decisions. The lesson was based on points, and your group's decisions decided if more points were given or if more points were taken away. Not only with the lesson, but also in the class, Ms. Smith explains that she gives extra class points to the student who asks logical and very in-depth questions. So when dealing with the lesson, the students, like I'd previously stated, really had to go into detail with what choice they made with each question. The goal of the lesson was to try to get the least amount of points, and you if you chose the good enough answer, then that would decrease your points, or if you didn't, then it would up your points, vice versa. Not only was this in the lesson, but just in the overall class, Miss Smith really wanted the class to, when they asked questions, she was okay with like the easier questions, but she really wanted to give those points to the students who asked very full, in-depth questions, which I thought was a very good idea, giving that it is fourth grade, so they should start to be able to put together those questions and know what they are asking, and not only what they're asking, but maybe ask more of it. Since the students are in groups, this really helps form relationships with their peers, no matter what social class or ethnicity the peers were. So all of the students were of different ethnicities in these groups. You had the Caucasian ones, you had the Hispanics, you had some students that were African American. They were just very diverse cultural groups. Everyone had a part that needed to be played. This helped bring unity to the classroom because the students are able to work with each other and learn more about each other instead of looking at what it is on the outside or the color of their skin. One thing that Mrs. Smith loves to swear by is unity, and she always wants her classes to feel that unity within each other. I think this is a great theme, and I would honestly love to put this, and not only put this, but also really live by this in my classroom, because I want my students to feel safe, no matter where they're from, what their background is, who they are as people. I always want my students to feel loved and cared, and that everyone is the same, everyone is treated the same, no matter where they come from or what their background is. And I feel as though Miss Smith really, really showed her students that they are loved, that they are cared for, and she respects them as who they are. Classroom discussions dealing with ethnicity. The students were able to learn about what kinds of rights their nationalities had during the time of the wagon trail. So one thing that I remember Mrs. Smith was doing is a lot of the wagon trail leaders were actually Hispanic. They were voted. There was like the students that were voted, and Miss Smith did inform them that back then, because they were Hispanic, they would not actually be wagon trails, or they would not actually be wagon leaders, and they wouldn't even be on the wagon trail to begin with because they weren't of Caucasian descent. So the students were free to discuss their thoughts about this topic, and no negative criticism was allowed by Miss Smith. Miss Smith ultimately gave her students freedom of speech when giving their thoughts and opinions. I remember her asking her class what they thought about that, having that most of the Hispanic wagon leaders wouldn't even be on the wagon trail to begin with. And a lot of them were upset, and a lot of them were confused as to why, because we do live in such different times. But Mrs. Smith was very good at assuring them that this is not how it is now. Everyone has their own role, and everyone plays that role to the best of their ability if they want to be able to win the game. And she really opened it up to how did that make you feel? How would you feel if you were in those times and you were voted like that because of the color of your skin or because of the nationality that you represent? And to be able to ask those questions within a lesson like this, I thought was intriguing, and I never would have thought of something like that. So that was pretty cool. Miss Smith's interaction with her class. She has a very strong relationship with her students, and this allows her to understand what their needs are and how she can meet those needs. I remember multiple times there was different students that would get upset easily or needed other needs than maybe the other class might have needed. And Mrs. Smith was very good about knowing what those needs were, and if they needed a break, she would give them that break. If they needed more of like a hands-on learning, she would kind of let the class do their own thing for a little bit and then go and see what was up with the student, see if they needed help. And I thought that that was something different and unique, because a lot of teachers are prone to just kind of like letting the student cool off and then kind of pushing them back. Whereas Mrs. Smith was very like, what do you need? How can I help? Okay, how do we fix this? She allows her students access to voice their opinions during appropriate times and make sure that the rest of the class is respectful of those opinions. So going back to what I was saying with her discussing that most Hispanics couldn't be wagon leaders. The the given students did voice their opinions, and Mrs. Smith was very good about saying, that is your opinion, and I do completely agree, or, I have my own opinion about the situation, but, you are very right when you say this. And they were very able to say what they needed to say and kind of get it off their chest and feel safe about it and not feel like they were hurting somebody else's feelings, which I thought was another awesome thing. Since this is a social studies class, Miss Smith points out the various ethnicities back then and how that given time affected that given ethnicity. So that was a lot of, if you were Hispanic, if you were African American, you would not be on the wagon trail. You would definitely not be a wagon leader. And so that was the example that I used. Examples such as all Hispanic students during the time of the wagon trail wouldn't be able to be a wagon leader due to the reason that they are Hispanic and not white. What I learned from Miss Smith. Miss Smith allows her students to give their opinions and validate themselves with certain topics. She definitely wanted the students to learn from what was happening and be able to use that as knowledge for when they move on, and to be able to stick up for themselves and to give their voice and let their voice be heard. And that was something that I really do wish to incorporate in my own classroom. Her students' work and partnership with other classmates starts and ends with them. She allows her students to show what they know and how to help/discuss what other classmates without any ethnic boundaries. One thing that I do really like about Mrs. Smith is that she really did clear any sort of differences that students might have, whether it was learning disabilities, whether it was ethnicities, whether you are of different religions, whether you are of different nationalities. She really wanted that to be excluded and really just, what do you think about this? How do you feel? What would you feel if you knew about this? And I thought that that was so unique and that was so different, and to be able to push other things aside and be like, okay, we do know about that, but how would you feel about this? Was something that I was very blown away by, and I really do wish to incorporate that in my own classroom here in the future. Everyone is treated the same no matter who you are or what ethnic background you came from. Unity is a very big deal in the classroom. She really lived by unity and wanting her class to feel the same and equal. And I think every one of us would want our class to be able to feel safe and the same as everyone else and not feel different or not feel unnormal. And she really preached that, which I thought was amazing. Miss Smith really shows the love she has for her students and wants them to succeed. She really does, and she really shows that in the way she teaches. She's very passionate about her teaching, and that was another thing that I wish to incorporate. I feel like a lot of teachers can fall out of that passion, and I feel like there's so many different ways that you could really re-spark that passion, not only for yourself but for the students, because the students aren't going to want to learn from somebody who isn't passionate about what they're teaching. And here's my references. Thank you.